Welcome, everyone, to Ballad for Two Friends, How Leonard Cohen and Bob Dylan Built a Tower of Song. I'd like to start up top by thanking our partner for this event, the Contemporary Jewish Museum. The Contemporary Jewish Museum in San Francisco makes the diversity of the Jewish experience relevant for a 21st century audience. They accomplish this through innovative exhibitions and programs that educate, challenge, and inspire in their beautiful museum's Daniel Libeskind design facility. You can come enjoy their exhibit, Experience Leonard Cohen, lead sponsorship generously provided by Craig Newmark Philanthropies, on view through February 13th, 2022, or visit them at www.thecjm.org. My name is PJ Grisar, and I am the Forward's culture reporter. The Forward is the leading voice in American Jewish journalism, covering national news from politics, anti-Semitism, and just all things going on in the Jewish community. We have a robust opinion section covering national news. Lost my place there. Covering the full spectrum of Jewish perspectives, and of course, a diverse culture section where we have written quite a bit about Bob Dylan and Leonard Cohen. And we'll be sharing a discounted subscription to get unlimited access to the Forward in an email tomorrow. And you can also sign up for our free newsletter to keep up with the American Jewish conversation. So, Dylan and Cohen, why talk about these two together? The answer in some ways is pretty simple, and that's because they seem to think and talk a lot about each other. There's a potentially apocryphal tale of Cohen spinning some Dylan at a party of Canadian poets. Cohen is said to have called him the greatest living poet in America. That was in 1966. The guest didn't really dig the music, reportedly, and Cohen apparently left in a huff, announcing his intention to be the next Bob Dylan. And in the next year, 1967, he'd release his first album. And there's also a story about an awkward first meeting in Cohen's dressing room. When Cohen was told Dylan was at his door, he's quoted as saying, "So?" But the two men went on to pay each other the highest of compliments. Dylan said, quote, "When people talk about Leonard, they fail to mention his melodies, which to me, along with his lyrics, are his greatest genius. Even the counterpoint lines. They give a celestial character and melodic lift to every one of his songs. As far as I know, no one else comes close to this in modern music. His gift or genius is in his connection to the music of the spheres." Note that kind of vaguely Kabbalistic character of this quote. Now, there are legends about the two men, how Dylan over coffee in Paris asked Cohen how long it took him to write Hallelujah, to which Cohen said something like 2 years, which was a lie. It took him a lot longer. When Cohen asked Dylan how long it took to write one of his songs, sometimes the song in question is I and I, the younger poet said 15 minutes. Cohen later described the conversation as shop talk, in which we traded lyrics, both of us astounded at the other's genius. It got a laugh from the assembled press, but few would argue that these two men, who had a lot in common and many differences, were just that, geniuses. Tonight, we are discussing their work and their friendship, how their lives collided, how their styles developed, and the spiritual life that fed into their work. And joining me are experts and fans. Denise Sullivan is a reporter and cultural worker based in San Francisco. She has been writing about music and interviewing musicians since she was a teenager, and has written on film, books, and visual art for print and online sources since the 90s. Author of several music biographies and editor of the literary anthology Your Golden Sun Still Shines. She's covered poetry for the San Francisco Chronicle, contemporary jazz for Downbeat, and most recently wrote about Dylan in the civil rights era for the Bob Dylan Center, opening in May of 2022. Larry Ratso Sloman began his career as a writer for Rolling Stone and is the author of On the Road with Bob Dylan. He's a collaborator on books with Howard Stern, Anthony Kiedis, Peter Criss, Mike Tyson, and David Blaine. He was the executive editor of National Lampoon magazine. Ratso interviewed Leonard Cohen about his work over many years, beginning in the early 70s. He's featured in the Netflix documentary Rolling Thunder Review about Dylan, and the forthcoming documentary Hallelujah, Leonard Cohen, A Journey and a Song. Ratso also released an album of his own, Stubborn Heart, featuring a Dylan cover and a duet with Nick Cave. Also joining us is Avery Hellman, aka Ismay. They are a singer-songwriter with the debut album Songs of Sonoma Mountain out now. Hailed by American songwriter for its meticulous guitar and delicately captivating vocals, the album is informed by their time working on the family ranch and the landscape around them. and it was actually recorded in a 100-year-old sheep barn. So I am so glad to have them here to talk a bit about these two giants. And so just to begin with, I'd love to start, why is it that you think these two appreciated each other so much? Ratso, we can start with you, and then I'd love to hear from Denise and Avery.
Well, like you said, two geniuses, and oftentimes, geniuses don't interact that well. But I don't know about these apocryphal stories, but I do know that Leonard has told me the story of the Paris meeting many times, and Bob was so enamored with getting Leonard to come to see him in the Rolling Thunder Review show in Montreal in '75 that he literally had me call him from a phone booth in the lobby of the hotel, tugging at my sleeve, saying, "Is he going to come? Is he going to come?" And finally, Leonard, Leonard agreed to come. And so then we had to, I had to pick him up to make sure he would actually come. And I got a car and actually brought Bob's wife, Sarah, who had just joined the Rolling Thunder tour at that point. So Sarah and I get in this cab, car service, and we go to Leonard's house, and at the appointed time, and I get out, and as I move towards the house, I hear tremendous amount of music coming from inside the house, and I knock on the door, and I say, "Leonard, it's time to go to the show." And he goes, "Well, no show is going to be as good as the music you're hearing right now." And they were playing like harmonica and just banging on drums and, on the table for drums. And so we all kind of pile into this car. They're singing French folk songs along the way. And we get to the backstage area. And the first person we see is Joni Mitchell, who had come to a show a few stops earlier and loved it so much that she just decided to throw away all her commitments and stay on the road with Rolling Thunder. So Joni, goes up and Leonard and them have a great greeting. And then Bob comes and Bob says, "So Leonard, you think you could sing a song?" Because that's what everybody, when we were in each city, and the Rick Danko was in the city and he came on stage, he did a song. So that was the way that the tour was structured, in that kind of loosey-goosey fashion. And Leonard said, basically, "No, I disdain the obvious support. I'll just sit out there and listen." And that's what he did. He sat and listened to the show, and Bob dedicated, of course, a song to him. So no, both of them, obviously, they have a lot in common in terms of their Jewish background, but and one from Montreal, one from the Midwest, and so they've had a tremendous relationship over the years, and that's all I could say about that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Denise, I mean, what do you think? I'd love to hear sort of how you see them, yeah, kind of maybe influencing each other musically, or just sort of maybe it's the appreciation of one great mind to another. I don't know.
Yeah, I just want to say I had recently reread that passage that Ratso just described, and it was so great. I mean, it really is. It's a wonderful book, and it was a lot like being there. For one who gets all of her information about these two greats through the interviews, through the documentation, through listening, of course, reading and watching. I came across many quotes where Cohen referred to Dylan as a genius repeatedly, throughout the course of their career. At one point, at several points, he says, he's like the Picasso of song. I kind of take that to mean that he's a master of many different types of song. Cohen called it like the rough hewn and the polished and everything in between, and his fluidity of moving between types of songs, through the years. So genius in that regard. And then I read some things to the effect, and Dylan would refer to Cohen songs as hymns, right? And you referred to that in your introduction, PJ, the sacredness. Well, it would seem to me that would be the highest compliment Cohen could receive as a lover of sacred music and creator of sacred songs. It deeply influenced by music of the church, the synagogue, the mosque, as he said. So I think there was a real obvious kinship in their seeking and their art making, and then performance. I just want to circle back around to that idea of Picasso. When I think of Picasso, it's like it's an artist who worked for the duration of his life, right, and was a cultural figure of influence and importance. And the same could be said of both of them, and particularly in reference to Cohen speaking on Dylan. This is someone who lived his life publicly and continues to perform now. We see him on tour, 80 years of age, doing his thing, and some would say better than ever. That's very much in the air right now as this tour is in progress. So, yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. And of course, it kind of echoes the end of Cohen's life, where he was sort of, well, of course, he was sort of forced to tour, but, really just sort of took on a new kind of life, as he was maturing. But Avery, I'd love to ask you, like, as someone who, I'm sure you have musicians you admire, or you wish that you could have written that line or that melody. Yeah, just how do you think of the two of them and this sort of special sort of relationship? I mean, they're two people who didn't, they didn't praise people lightly, I feel like.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about sort of the similarities and differences between them. And I, as a younger kind of musician, I think a lot about their early years, in particular because I was so inspired. I read the biography of Leonard Cohen by Sylvie Simmons, and that was a huge inspiration to me as a songwriter to understand how deeply he studied and, succeeded in the world of poetry before he ever was a musician, which was a huge revelation to me. And that was hugely inspiring. And at the time when I read that biography, I was definitely playing a lot of Bob Dylan songs. It's a lot in the sort of like vernacular of bluegrass music, which is how I started playing music. And it took me a while to appreciate Leonard Cohen's music, because I don't know why I had to understand his story, but reading his story and understanding all that went into that, all that went into his craft before he ever started, that really got me deeply interested in Leonard Cohen. So I started out much more as a Bob Dylan kind of person, and fell more into Leonard Cohen. But I guess like if it's appropriate for me to ask a question, not knowing as much about Bob Dylan, I know a fair bit about Leonard Cohen. Like I said, how he was a really accomplished poet in college and after college, and an accomplished writer. But I'm curious to know like how that differed from Bob Dylan's sort of entry into the world of music and songwriting.
Ratso, do you want to answer that one?
Well, I mean, Dylan, that was the dog in the background. Dylan, when he was interested in actually rock and roll since he was in Hibbing High School, and made up the story later that he had traveled with Buddy Holly or things like that. But he was, he fronted a little band in high school, and eventually went to college, and there he really fell into the whole folk scene, and then came to New York to meet Woody Guthrie, who was ill at the time in a hospital. And there's a lot of controversy now about whether Woody liked Bob's songs, and that's, I think, revisionist thinking. I mean, from what I know and from what Arlo says, is that Woody loved Bob's songs and loved the fact that he was picking up Woody's guitar that kills fascists, so to speak. So yeah, I mean, that's Leonard came from a completely different background, and Leonard was an established poet, and then I think, but also Leonard was in music groups in Montreal too. So they had that music bug in them, both of them, at an early age.
Yeah, definitely. His sort of, they were all wearing buckskin jackets, something like that. Yeah. No, definitely. But that's something I'd love to talk a bit about, because obviously Cohen, his serious pursuit of music, it was kind of coming later in life, and it was kind of coming really towards the end of folk in some ways. And Denise, I'd love to sort of ask you a bit about how you kind of see them fitting into that movement, because that's very much your area.
Yeah, well, just addressing what Avery was asking, the type of poetry that was in the air, and I think that they were drawn to, that of Dylan Thomas in particular, and then later the beats, was a kind of spoken word, as it's known now, right? It wasn't so much to be read off the page as it was to be read aloud, right, in these coffee house situations, or recorded and aired. And it's not a far leap from poetry to song, right? We know these things have been tied together since antiquity. That said, song has a greater reach than poetry, for reasons that we could argue and people have argued for centuries. But I think that, so there's that, if that addresses some of that question, that the beats were very important to that evolution, right? In addition to the old folky traveling topical troubadour tradition. And then, and we have to go way back to what's in these men's DNA, right? As storytellers, and carrying forward this idea of telling stories through songs, conjuring legends and myths, and all this classic stuff that they both come really loaded with. Song of Songs. I mean, all the biblical stuff, which I am by no means a scholar and prepared to address, but we will probably touch on it as we go. So that's kind of also back to that mutual appreciation question, is that they had each other where they could meet head to head on these issues that they had both studied and carried in their heart, and they were going out there to try to change other people's hearts and minds. So this is a lot of common area that, a lot of poets and singer-songwriters also occupy that space.
Yeah. And I mean, of course, we are thinking of them as sort of Jewish writers, clearly Cohen, born into basically Jewish royalty in Montreal, as close as you could get to that. Dylan, having definitely enmeshed in the Jewish community in Minnesota, but yeah. So, but maybe potentially at a bit more of a remove. He did go to a Zionist camp, I believe. Things like, yeah. But just I would love to hear how you see that sort of informing their work. Yeah, and because I mean, it feels different. There's something that feels like a different way that they're articulating it in song.
Well, I just want to say, I cannot speak to anything about Jewish
Right.
identity. But what I will say is that in this time where they were coming up, and Ratso did allude to, it was rock and roll. This fueled Bob Dylan's self and the idea of who he would become. This idea of the rebel in society was emerging, and both of them, though rooted in ancient people and tradition, right? They wanted to break out. They wanted to do something different. And so not being constricted by the old mores and ways and was a driving force, I think. And that's part of the emergence of both of them, whether it's Cohen as a songwriter a little bit later and Dylan escaping the small town life in the Midwest and going to where it was all happening, Greenwich Village, in the early 60s.
Mm. I mean, there's a prophetic impulse there. I mean, yeah, these, and of course, Cohen in particular, very, very interested in the prophets. Yeah, Ratso, I'd love it if you could weigh in on that.
Well, I mean, their Jewish experience, it was essential to both of them. I mean, and they both, as we'll see over the years, become, through their songs, the songs reflect the spiritual odyssey of both of them. And Leonard, don't forget, Leonard was going around trying on all these different kind of
Yeah, of course.
religious beliefs like Scientology and things like that. Bob, I think, was more conventional, but Bob was very much influenced from the beginning by biblical imagery and using biblical imagery in different ways in his songs. So I think they both and Bob's spiritual journey is incredibly well documented by any Christian website you go to that talks about music. But that's the thing about both of them, is that they're not afraid to kind of put themselves out. And then, I spent a lot of time with Bob around the time of the born again, so-called born again period. And, to me, it was, he was just, he had some kind of spiritual experience. He had been surrounded by people in Malibu who had taken him to this church, and he then produced, two of the, at least two of the greatest gospel records ever made. I mean, he was, able to revolutionize that kind of genre, with his, brilliant songs, that which he's playing, to this day. You Got to Serve Someone is on the set list now, on the tour that he's doing now. And Leonard, the same thing. I mean, Leonard, there's a crack in everything. There's a tremendous amount of Kabbalistic imagery in, Leonard's songs. So I think that we should be glad that they both had, had these spiritual journeys, which they then were able to transmit to us. And, and that's something that I think, has influenced, their listeners over the years. I know it's done that for me.
Absolutely, yeah. And then I would love to sort of ask about kind of their evolution as artists, the evolution of their sound. Of course, Ratso, you were around, when Dylan was going electric, a little bit after, I guess. But yeah, and then and then of course Cohen later moving into a lot of synths, things like that, experimenting with sound and production and things like that. And I'm wondering kind of how you see those sorts of tracks maybe moving in parallel, or what they were consuming, just a sense of their evolution, from these artists that are very kind of acoustic to something else.
Well, I mean, it's no surprise that, Dylan went electric for a number of reasons, and one of which was that he always wanted to front a rock and roll band. So, but he also, I think, felt constrained by the notion of being the voice of a generation and having, people like Pete Seeger, blanching at the fact that he could write songs that were, non-political songs and songs that, wound up on Blonde, which is, a completely different way to go than the times are unchanging. So, with Bob, I think it made sense that, fronting the band. But even before that, when he played in Newport with Bloomfield and people like that, it to him was, I think, just a tremendous declaration of freedom from other people's, expectations. Leonard, well, I guess you could say Leonard experimented, when he started playing the Casio and started, doing songs that had synthesizers in them. But, Bob always, and in fact, we alluded to the fact that Bob had, in the intro, that Bob had praised Leonard in terms of his melodic ability, which very few people do. Very few people talk about that, but it's, it was a very prescient comment. I mean, that's, Leonard's melodies are just gorgeous, and they're also very much influenced by, Jewish traditional melodies.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then, of course, there's the other side of this, which people are chiming in the comments, and they're right to. I haven't gotten to it yet, but of course, there's the political dimension to this music. Yeah, just sort of in terms of their evolution there, I'm wondering how you see that kind of developing. Kind of going from their youth to their work as mature artists. And that question can be for anybody.
Yeah.
Denise,
I mean,
it
we
seems
know
like your
about, I mean,
wheelhouse,
Bob,
maybe.
Bob,
Sorry.
No, I was going to say, we know that, Bob cut his teeth on the civil rights movement, and playing, in Mississippi and things like that. So, Bob was political to the point where, and then he had that experience where the Emergency Civil Liberties Union dinner, he made some comments right after JFK was killed, expressing some kind of compassion for Lee Harvey Oswald, which was, a horrific thing, I guess, to say at that time. At least that's the way the people at that dinner felt. But again, it's like Bob's talents and his amazing mind. It was just too big to be constrained by a sectarian or a partisan kind of ideology, and so that's it didn't surprise me when he went electric. It also didn't surprise me in retrospect when he kind of wanted to get rid of the mantle of being the conscious of a generation.
Yeah, Denise, would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I always like to argue that Dylan did not really retreat from the overtly political. I mean, we started by talking about the Rolling Thunder Review and that show at Madison Square Garden, which was to free Reuben Hurricane Carter from prison on the false charges that he'd been accused of. Before that, Dylan had cut the George Jackson single, which, a very controversial figure at the time and in American history, if you will. I mean, but certainly not apolitical. Okay. So I think there's a deep thread of political poetry that runs throughout all of his work and into the present day, for sure. one thing I just want to circle back to, because you were asking about that shift that came around the 80s, right? I think that the 80s was a crisis for them as middle-aged artists, or mid-career, what we should say at that point. Well, but we didn't know that it would go on forever, but so maybe it was early mid-career, but at any rate, the 80s were a crisis for a lot of folks because what was going on politically, but as it pertains to music, the studio sounds were changing. Older, quote unquote, older artists didn't really know what to do about this punk rock and new wave, and they were trying to adapt, and the sounds hadn't really worked themselves out, right? The new digital recording modes. So Cohen hit on this synthesizer thing, which really worked for him. It worked for him on a lot of levels. One of them being that he could do it at home and kind of on his own, or with his small set of collaborators, because that introverted, that I don't want to say, well, isolated, there were points where he was intentionally isolated. And I think Avery mentioned Sylvie Simmons' book. I reread it recently, and the thing that kept coming up for me over and over and over again was Cohen's humility, but also his unsureness about putting these messages out until they were absolutely refined and ready. Okay, so we know that he worked very long and hard, but he wasn't overly confident in his abilities, right? Whereas Dylan, much more, like we said, confident at shape shifting, putting out messages or not, or secretive or hidden messages, which is how his thing developed. His change in songwriting from the topical and the very overt anthemic and topical political issues oriented songs to fast forward way ahead, but now this new style, which is in folk tradition, but borrowed bits and pieces and text and kind of this patchwork that is a labyrinth that people will be looking into and discovering many hundreds of years from now. Trust me on this. It is a very intentional new way of working that is different, but in the tradition of how he came to learn songwriting, right? Pulling bits and pieces from here and there to make something wholly original.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we see that tentativeness of Cohen, even just that first time Judy Collins called him up to perform, famously sort of slinked off into the wings.
Yeah, can I say something about?
Go ahead, please.
This the idea of political or topical songs, which is in the case of Rubin, I don't know about George Jackson. I think the thread about all of those things are basically that that Black people were getting screwed, and in fact, that's a theme that goes back even Blind Willie McTell, but sung in a much different kind of way, but not a topical way. But the thing with Rubin is that Bob, before he wrote a song about Rubin, before he did any of that, he went to jail and met with him. And he sat down, and the two of them had a mano, long discussion. And that's where, Bob got the impetus to, write this song about the hurricane and highlight it on, and then eventually we had the big Night of the Hurricane thing that George Lois put together, the great ad man. So, I think, you could say, that Dylan was still writing political songs when he was writing Neighborhood Bully, which is about Israel.
Right, of course, a lot to say there about both of them.
Right. But so it's political, topical, but it wouldn't just be kind of writing a song about. I mean, a strike in or in some place that's happening now. I mean, it evolved. His political, if you want to call it meta, whatever. Somebody said meta political, but I mean, it evolved over the years, and it became, much more nuanced and much more, in some respects, interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah, Avery, I'd love to ask you, as a songwriter, and Ratso, I'm guessing you're doing some songwriting too, but just sort of in terms of the process, what kind of, oh, wait, did we just lose her or them? Sorry. Yeah, I think we just lost them, but yeah, but Ratso, in terms of in terms of that kind of songwriting, the meticulousness of Cohen, the sort of kind of crazy speed of Dylan. I mean, how do you see that sort of figuring into the music
All right.
as it?
First of
As
all,
it comes?
I'm glad you
Sorry.
brought that up again,
Sure.
because I'd like to, dispute that notion once and for all.
Oh, great.
And it's very, I mean, it's true. Leonard agonized over every line. And, I mean, just look at Hallelujah, which, literally took him, years and years and years. I mean, when he said 2 years to Dylan, in that Paris cafe, he said to me, I was lying. It was much more than 2 years. And the idea that Bob, his best work is written in some kind of frenzy. I mean, they both talk about inspiration when it comes to writing a song with, and Bono, other people talk about this, where they're the vessel for this song. And yes, that can definitely happen. I had an experience like that with this, a couple of songs I wrote, where I just, all of a sudden wrote these songs. I didn't know where I was going, and it turned out to be great. But but one of the things I learned, and I spent 2 or 3 times I've been out to Tulsa, where they, next year they're going to open up the Bob Dylan Center, and it's going to be just phenomenal. But I was asked to write, huh?
Oh, Denise has some work in there. I'm guessing you're about to tell us you do too.
Yeah. So I was asked to write something for a catalog they're putting out, and it was pick your favorite Dylan song or something like that, or a song that you wanted to write about. And I decided to, throw a curveball and do a song that was on the Under the Red Sky album called Handy Dandy, and which to me was one of the most autobiographical songs Bob ever wrote. And nobody sees it like that. So when I was there, I talked to the archivist, and he said, well, yeah, I think we have some things on that. And he brought me down a big folder, and it was like page after page after page of handwritten scribbles with changing, verses and changing and writing new, lyrics, and then, rewriting old lyrics. And it was so obvious that he had spent so much time honing this one song that people think is basically a throwaway song. So, I mean, Bob's got a great sense of humor. One of the funniest, driest sense of humor I've ever encountered on anybody. So when Bob says, yeah, well, Leonard, how long did it take you? 2 years. Bob, how long did it take you to write? 15 minutes. Or he wrote in the back of a cab or something like that. I mean, it's a put on. He really does the work too. I mean, anyway.
Absolutely. No, that completely makes sense. I mean, these great works don't just appear out of nowhere. It takes the time, and whatever mist of, just divine inspiration, the genius in the wall coming to you, the muse is, it's just that. It's
Yeah.
I think that they both talk about a lot, if they knew where where the inspiration came from, or that force came from, they would go there all the time. And I remember when Ed Bradley did that wonderful 60 Minutes interview. You can't find it that easily anymore, but Dylan said that, he can't write that way anymore, like that the songs don't come out whole cloth like that as much. Now, I don't know whether to believe that or not, but he did say that, and we know that they do believe that the inspiration is divine, and they worked really hard. It doesn't have to be either or. I think one of the most valuable things that I get from both of their writings is that it's never either or. It's never just black and white. It's a lot more complicated and nuanced than that. And I appreciate Ratso, saying that all this material is loaded with political, if you will, social, I think is probably more accurate content. I mean, these are highest level caliber artists. Anyone that's working at that level is going to reflect the times in which they're living. Okay, we have lived in an extraordinary time in human history, and we had these incredible documentarians to take down all of this stuff. And not only that, they were also very much in touch with the old world. I think Dylan writes about it in Chronicles very effectively, how the old world, you could touch it and feel it. It's not like now, we think of, I don't know, the 70s, maybe young people can't really relate to it. It's just like so far away. But when they were growing up, certainly, the early part of the 20th century was still visible, like in the landscape, and some of the people were around, and so they brought that, as well as the present matters and issues of their time. And, again, as Ratso said, civil rights, black and white, very much on the table. Now, that said, they could also foretell what was coming. And I see a lot of people in the comments, why aren't you talking about democracy? Why aren't you talking about the future? Why aren't you talking? Well, of course, we can't not talk about that. I mean, everything in that album, it was kind of foretold in kind of a scary way, right? And I'm sorry, I'm free associating right now. I just kind of
No, it's great.
But I just back to something Ratso said, it's like sometimes the messages are more elegant and encoded, and other times there's a kind of mid-period song. One of my favorite songs, a much hated song by Bob Dylan, Union Sundown. Pull it out, listen to it right now, see what's going on. It's happening, and so I appreciate all of it. And I appreciate the songs of beauty and love and spirit, of course. But that's why they are who they are. They covered all of human experience. I came across this phrase that Cohen used. I had never seen before: psychic catastrophe. The psychic catastrophe that we're living. He explained it to be the conditions of the earth, the planet, our civilization, quote unquote, our civilization melting down, falling apart. And some folks are in denial, they refuse to see, and they're asleep. While this is a psychic catastrophe. These artists were awake, is awake. One of them is still with us, very much awake, sees what's going on. We need visionaries, to report back, so we can stay alert.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, Dylan now putting out new music, he's I mean, it's easy to sort of overlook the relevance of something like Murder Most Foul as something sort of retrograde, going back. But I mean, there's
not at all.
commentary there
Very
for
contemporary.
you.
Yes,
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, look at the Mother of Muses, which is a very interesting song because he's going back even to pre-Christianity days, the Greek civilization and Roman civilization. So I mean, he's really it's just incredible breadth of spirituality he's talking about in that song, and he's imploring the muses to help him out. So it's it's different from saying making a statement about Jesus. So to me, it's a really fascinating that, and also the Key West song, which is another kind of just it's staggering. And one of the things that I always loved about Bob's work is that there'll be disparate images within the same verse, and it's like, how the hell did he come up with that? It's like it's just such an incredible leap of imagination. Like I think in Caribbean Wind, where he's talking about pounding on tin. I mean, it's just these incredible images. Leonard's stuff is much more, at least to my view, it's much more polished and honed and a carefully, but they're both, in many ways, as Denise said, they're both incredibly visionary artists. And just take a look at there's a new video that Cohen's people just put out called Puppets, which everybody should go to YouTube or Venmo, whatever it's on, and just do search Leonard Cohen Puppets, and it's an unbelievable video where he talks about almost this kind of, well, the Jews were puppets when they were brought to their death. The Germans were puppets for enacting that death, and and it's a very interesting perspective on a kind of a meta look at so what's behind, who's the puppet master, which is the obviously fascinating question in that. And what Leonard's always also able to do is to bring it from the political, if you will, Nazis, Jews, blah blah blah, to the personal, and that's where his artistry shines too.
Yeah, Puppets is an incredible track, and if those of you haven't heard it, it has the cantor from his home synagogue and also a German choir singing together. It's really something. But yeah, so we're about ready for the musical portion of the evening. But Avery, are you almost ready? I mean, this seems like such a great note to end on, as somebody who is sort of in the younger generation and very influenced by this music and sort of so we but I think right before we start the music, I would just love to ask everybody, if we had to reduce Leonard Cohen or Bob Dylan to one album, to one song, what do we look to? I'm interested to hear what everyone's answer is. It'd be a bit of a curveball, sorry.
Who's going first? Who's on first?
I'll go
Or a
with
favorite.
I'll go with Anthem for Cohen, partly because we know what went into making it happen, and also that sentiment about the crack in the light, and it's just beautiful. I'm gonna take a minute before I choose my Dylan.
Sure.
All right, I'll step in for Leonard, and obviously, I guess I should say Hallelujah, because I'm prominent in that documentary, and
Sure are.
in some respects was patient zero of the whole Hallelujah phenomena, because it was discussions with Bob and telling Bob how great Hallelujah was. And when Leonard told me the story about bringing it up to the album up to Yetnikoff at CBS, and Yetnikoff famously said, "Well, Leonard, we know you're great. We just don't know if you're any good," and then refused to put out the album in the United States. I like an avenging angel. I saw Yetnikoff at a Bob Dylan 30th anniversary party that Sony was putting on, Columbia, and And I went up to him and I said, shame on you, shame on, how will you not put out that album? Which had Hallelujah on it, of course. So Hallelujah is a sentimental favorite. I also like If It Be Thy Will for Leonard. Now let Denise tell the Dylan thing and I'll figure out who.
It's great though. In the chat, we're getting all sorts of people coming in with their favorites.
You trickster, PJ, come on now.
I
Was not
didn't,
ready for it.
yeah.
I wasn't ready for it. But, I just, because it came up earlier in the conversation and, we all have our personal favorites and, it's just not fair to ask for one from either of these people. But I've always loved Blind Willie McTell. I never understood why it wasn't on the record to begin with. You listen to it. We listened to the most recent, outtake again. I'm like, oh, well, I don't know. It's like, I could listen to the song all day, specifically because it speaks to that dilemma of America.
Right.
But that's not, I could have categories and that's just one.
Of course.
I may weigh in with another.
All right, I'll briefly mention the fact that I also famously yelled at Bob when he was recording that album, and then Bill Graham, who was his manager at the time, called me up and said, "Come to the studio." This is after we had done the video for Joker Man, George Lewis and I. So I went to the studio, and I had heard some previous. I was in the studio, I think, a few times because I heard some previous songs, and then when they played me the final album sequence, it was over, and Bob said, "What do you think?" And I said, "Where's Blind Willie McTell? How can you not put that on the album? Are you kidding? That's one of the greatest songs ever." And Bob looked at me and says, "Oh, Ratso, calm down. It's only an album. I've got 20 of them." So that was his answer. But I would have to say another exchange I had with Bob, because we talked about it at one point, the end of Rolling Thunder, we talked about, we were sitting in one of the cafes at the other end, I think, in the Village. And no, this was earlier in the tour. I was telling him about Sooner or Later, One of Us Must Know. It's one of my favorite Dylan songs. And this is a piece, PG audience, so I won't go into that story. But it's in my book on Bob Dylan and his response to that song, Sooner or Later, One of Us Must Know.
And great. And Avery and Ismay. Yeah, I feel like we might be hearing them, but if not, that's good too. But I think we have some people eager to hear the music who need to hop off and would love to hear it. But thank you everybody so much for your time. It was so great to hear from you. And of course we could go on forever, but I think we do got to wrap up. But yeah, Avery,
Thank
please
you.
take your time in playing.
Sure, yeah. So we're gonna play Leonard's song. The first song I thought of when you asked that question about Leonard Cohen is I was thinking about from his last record when he was alive, You Want It Darker, that song. But I think this song, not as popular as a lot of his other songs, but symbolizes a really deep essence of the poetry of Leonard Cohen, Story of Isaac. And this is a version that was changed up a little bit by a guy named Andrew Marlin. So it's actually a little more in sort of like the Bob Dylan folk American music tradition. Well, the door it opened slowly. My father, he came in. I was 9 years old, and he stood so tall above me. His blue eyes, they were shining, and his voice was very cold. He said, I've had a vision, and you know I'm strong and holy. I must do what I've been told. So we started up the mountain. He was running, I was walking, and his axe was made of gold. Well, the trees, they got much smaller, like a lady's mirror, and we stopped to drink some wine. And he threw the bottle over, and it broke a minute later, and he put his hand on mine. Well, I thought I saw an eagle, but it might have been a vulture. I could never quite decide. And my father built an altar. He looked once behind his shoulder, for he knew I would not hide. You build these altars now, sacrifice your children. You must not do it anymore. For a scheme is not a vision, and you never have been tempted by a demon or God. Oh, you who stand before me now, your hatchets blunt and bloody, not there before. When I stood upon a mountain, and my father's hand was trembling with the beauty of the world. If you call me brother now, forgive if I inquire, just according to whose plan. For when it all comes down to dust, I will help you if I must, but I will kill you if I can. And when it all comes down to dust, I will kill you if I must, and I would help you if I can. Well, there's a Leonard Cohen song for you, Story of Isaac. I didn't quite have time to do all the verses. He tends to have a lot of verses sometimes, but I was going to ask you, is that all we have time for? I figured that was
No,
a
I
good
think
way to end it.
well, first of all, before I get in the way of the music, I just want to say, and would love to hear a Dylan tune, of course. But yeah, before that, just some business housekeeping. So everyone, thank you so much for coming, and please be sure to keep an eye out on your email tomorrow. There's going to be information on donating and subscribing to the Forward. Also, you can check out forward.com/events for more events like this, and we'll be hosting a Q&A with Jeremy Cowan the founder of Hebrew Beer tomorrow evening. I actually have some old Hebrew beer on my desk, which I have not drank and is probably skunky now. But yeah, would love to let's just get sent out on some Dylan. Would love it.
All right, let's do it. Got to switch up guitars for this one. So this version of this Dylan song is based off of the Odetta version that she did way back when. Come gather around, people, wherever you roam, and admit that the waters around you have grown, and accept that soon you'll be drenched to the bone. If your time to you is worth saving, and you better start swimming or you'll sink like a stone, for the times they are a-changin'. Come writers and critics, prophesize with your pen, and keep your eyes wide, chance it won't come again. But don't speak too soon, for the wheel's still in spin, and there's no telling who it's naming. For the loser now is later to win. Oh, the times they are a-changin'. Come senators, congressmen, please heed the call. Don't stand in the doorway, don't block up the hall. For he who gets hurt will be he who's stalled, and the battle outside it is raging. It will soon shake your windows and rattle your walls, for the times they are a-changin'.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This is super fun, and I loved hearing from these wonderful experts to learn even more about these two amazing artists.
Of course, of course. Well, what a note to end on. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Hey, PJ, could I just do
Yeah,
one thing?
absolutely.
There are a lot
Please,
of people
Ratso.
have asked questions. A lot of people have asked questions that went unanswered in the chat thing.
Yeah,
So if somebody wants to follow up on some questions to me, they can just go to my website, www.ratso.org. I'm a charity, and I'll be happy to explain what I meant by Leonard saying disdain the obvious report and things like that. I don't want to leave these threads hanging.
Of course, great. Thank you so much. And of course, I'm sorry we could not get to all the Q&A questions, but there you go. Ratso is a resource for you. And of course, you can email me. It's just my last name at forward.com.
Thank you so much. That was beautiful, Ismay, Avery. Thanks for having me, PJ. Nice to talk with you, Ratso, and thanks for all your contributions, all of your contributions to the discussion.
All right, great.
Thanks.
Thank you, Denise. All right. And then we'll end on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.